afternoon, everybody. This is the Senate Government Operations Committee on Friday, January 27th, 2023. And we are here with our Chief Counsel, Jen Carby, and she is going to walk us through S39. We're just a slight bit late because we had a little mishap, but we are ready to get going. And if you want to take it away.
Great, thank you. So nice to be here, Jen Carby, Legislative Counsel. So we are looking at S39. I think everyone in this room was a co-sponsor of. Just a moment. So this is an act relating to compensation and benefits for members of the Vermont General Assembly. And so I will just walk you through what is in here. We start out with the health insurance benefits section. It looks like there are more changes to this section than there actually are. So there are a fair number of either editing updates, sort of style updates, or ways of changing the way things are referred to. So on page 3, this is looking at the definition of employees for purposes of group insurance for state employees. And so some of these are just revisions or taking out the exclusion of members of the General Assembly on lines 6 or 7, and then kind of adding the employees of the Historical Society, Credit Union, VSCA, and Council on the Arts affirmatively, rather than saying it does not include persons other than those employees. And it removes a reference to the Vermont Film Corporation, which is no longer in existence. And then toward the bottom of the page, you'll see it says the term employees also includes members of the General Assembly. And then it says, as set forth in subdivision 4, Romanet 4, that we will look at on page 4. And that says, for purposes of group hospital surgical medical expense insurance, which is the way this statute refers to what we think of as health insurance, and any flexible spending account program, FSAs, offered to state employees for healthcare or dependent care expenses or both. For those purposes, the term employees includes members of the General Assembly. And then in the middle of the page, it says that the premiums for extending insurance coverage to the members will be paid in full by the General Assembly. That language tracks what is in the previous subdivision B, Romanet 1, on those employees of those various kind of state adjacent entities. But this may be subject to change. I think Sharon and I didn't have clear communication on this, so we may be talking about what a premium split might look like. All right, then we get to starting in section 2, we have compensation and expenses. So that was adding you to health insurance, you the members of the General Assembly. And then we get to compensation and expenses. So section 2 deals with a statute relating to the Speaker and the President pro tem. And it's really making kind of a conforming change to reflect what's going to happen in section 3. So this is saying it keeps their compensation the same and specifies that their allowance or reimbursement of expenses would be not only for mileage, meals, and lodging as under current law, but also for child, dependent, and elder care, which we'll get to in section 3. So it's just saying that the same kind of benefits that the members of the General Assembly get under subsection 1052B, which we are looking at in section 3. Section 3 amends 32 VSA section 1052, and that is the section on compensation and expense reimbursement for members of the General Assembly. And the first couple of underlined things you'll see in subsection A and subdivisions 1 and 2 are just adding some subsection and subdivision headings, because it starts to become a pretty long section. So this one lets you know that subsection A is going to be all about compensation. Subdivision 1 is session compensation. We're not making any changes to that. You want me to slow down?
No.
So session compensation, and it's not making any changes to that. So that's still calculated in the same way with the same indexing. I think Mike can be talking to you about some of that after me. Similarly, it's not making any substantive changes to subdivision 2 on special session compensation, which is, as under current law, you get 1/5 of your weekly compensation for each day that the special session is happening. And we just kind of updated for better grammar, the way it says each day that the special session where the House that you are a member of is sitting. Then we get to the new language on adjournment compensation. This would provide that during adjournment of the General Assembly, when it's not in session, a member would be entitled to an amount equal to 1/5 of that adjusted weekly compensation. So that same kind of per diem based on your weekly compensation, rounded up to the nearest dollar for each week of adjournment. So you get the equivalent of a day's pay for a week when you're in per week when the legislature is adjourned. And in addition, during adjournment, a member who is serving on a special committee or joint committee, in addition to that 1 day's worth a week and the per diem that you get for actually coming to Montpelier for a meeting that you are required to attend because you're a member of one of those committees, you would also be entitled to compensation for time spent preparing for meetings of that special or joint committee at an hourly rate that basically is just a way of calculating an hourly rate based on that same daily and weekly rate. So just parsing that out further. So 2.5% of the weekly rate because it's 40 hours. All right, and then during any session of the General Assembly, each member would receive an allowance for or reimbursement of expenses as set forth in this subsection. So with expense reimbursement, I might pause for just a minute here. Last year, you, the legislature, made a change on, or you, those who were sitting in the same seats that you're now occupying, if you weren't a member, changed the mileage reimbursement from an allowance to an actual reimbursement. And this is about to do that as an option for meals and lodging. The reason to think about doing actual reimbursement as opposed to an allowance is that an allowance amount is considered tax, it gets treated as taxable income because it's not based on reimbursing you for anything. It's just a set amount that you're entitled to get regardless of what you actually spent. If you get reimbursement of actual expenses, it's entitled to be excluded from or allowed to be excluded from taxable income. And this is both at the federal and state level. So last year, the legislature moved mileage reimbursement from the allowance category to the reimbursement category. The provisions here in subdivisions B, 2, and 3 are splitting those out to be separate for meals and for lodging, and saying you either get a meals allowance, or in this case for meals allowance, or reimbursement of actual expenses, meals expenses. And you would, each member would inform the Office of Legislative Operations, that's the office that Mike leads, of your choice, the member's choice of the meals allowance or meals expense reimbursement prior to the beginning of the biennium. And that choice would stay in effect through the biennium unless the member notified the office that they wanted to make a change. So you're not telling every week or every month, I'm going to keep doing this. You just keep what you're doing unless you say there's a change, at least the way this is drafted. And you may hear from Mike on operationally how that would work or whether that works. So if a member elects a meals allowance, then they would get an amount equal, this is under current law too, equal to the daily amount for, now we're backing out to just meals in this piece, determined for Montpelier by the Federal Office of Government-Wide Policy and published in the Federal Register for the year of the session for each day that the House in which you are a member sits. So right now, the meals allowance, and you're probably more familiar with it than I am, but the meals allowance provides members with an amount equal to what the federal government says a meals allowance would be for federal employees for each day that the House is sitting. If you went with if a member went with the meals reimbursement route, so these would be the two options, that allowance or reimbursement, a member who chooses to go the reimbursement route would get reimbursement equal to the actual amount, the amounts expended by the member for meals for each day that the House in which the member serves shall sit, as well as meals for the night preceding the first legislative day of each week during the session. So figured if you came here on Monday, you get Monday night. You can certainly talk about that, but that was the logic here. The amount of the daily reimbursement under this section shall not exceed that amount that you get for the allowance. So you don't get more during the reimbursement route. You cap at the same amount as the allowance. And this would require the member to provide meal receipts or otherwise substantiate the amounts expended to Mike's office in the form and manner that Mike prescribes. Giving him some power.
Does it actually, it does say
It does
Mike.
say Director of Legislative Operations.
It's a Ferrari tax.
All right, and then we have similar language for lodging. So each member gets either an allowance or reimbursement of actual lodging expenses. Members would inform the Office of Legislative Operations of their choice at the beginning of the biennium. It would stay in effect through the remainder of the biennium unless member notifies the office that they want to make a change. The lodging allowance is the same as under current law, but because I split out the meals and lodging into different provisions, it looks like the lodging allowance is new, but it used to just be lumped in with the meals allowance language. So a member who elects to receive a lodging allowance gets an amount equal to the daily amount for lodging determined by the Federal Office of Government-Wide Policy for Montpelier for each day that the house in which the member serves shall sit. If it's lodging reimbursement, then the member would get an amount equal to the actual amounts expended by the member for lodging for each day that the house in which the member serves shall sit, as well as, again, the night before if you stay over. If you stay over the night before on Monday night.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question on this policy, and this might be a question for Mike, but I had heard colloquially that it was set by the price that the Capitol Plaza has per night.
I think anecdotally, it works the other way around, that our staff have worked with the Capitol Plaza to get the rate that they charge to fit within the amount set. No, Mike's saying no to that too.
No.
I think we'll let Mike.
From
Do you want Mike to speak now? or when
Why
he
don't you
gets
wait and go through it when we're up here?
ready? Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
But the amount in the statute has always been based, or at least for recent memory, based on the federal
Okay.
amounts,
Yeah,
because
that
they
makes
do make
sense.
those calculations for different regions of the country. All right, so again, there's the same cap. You don't get more of the reimbursement than you get with the allowance. So the amount you get for reimbursement cannot exceed the amount set by the federal government for Montpelier. And lodging receipts or other substantiation of the amounts expended would be provided to the Office of Legislative Operations. So I'll pause there because that was a lot on expenses, actually compensation and expenses.
I have a question, which I'm not sure you will be able to answer. It might be an avid question, but one of the reasons that the tax came in to play for reimbursement or for the stipends was because of changes in federal tax law, I believe. And then that federal tax law is set to expire in 2025, I believe.
That's right.
So is that true?
Yes, that is largely true, and Abby will do a better job of explaining, but this is the idea of an accountable plan or not an accountable plan under IRS law. And there had been, prior to the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of, I think, 2018, the amounts, and Mike may know more about this from having been asked this question a number of times, but the amounts that members who lived more than 50 miles from the State House incurred in the way of, or received in the way of at least lodging, I'm not sure if it was meals, I think we bundled them together, so maybe it was meals and lodging,
it was all.
were excludable from taxable income. Members who lived closer within 50 miles did not get to exclude those amounts from their taxes. That was set at the federal level. The federal government the Congress put a pause on that in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. They suspended that deductibility provision until 2025. I don't know that we have any sense for what will happen as we get closer to that date. But this would allow that if you provided the opportunity for members to choose a reimbursement path then they would be eligible to do that unless something dramatic change to the federal level would be able to continue doing that through 2025, even if that, I think if that deduction came back.
Okay, okay. Does that answer your question? Because you and I talked about that, Senator Norris.
I don't know where to go with this. I'm reading, as Jennifer's reading this, I'm going, so what's the incentive to go with this program when you can't exceed, because using the plaza, for instance, $134, we break even. They charge you now, last year was $8, this year's $12.
Yeah.
For parking. If you can't exceed the 134, I mean, what's the point of me keeping all of my receipts to begin with to try to recoup the $12 for parking down there when I just put my stipend and just not worry about receipts and so on and so forth?
I think from my understanding is that if you do it with receipts, it wouldn't be taxed because it would be a reimbursement. If you just do it as a stipend, it would be taxed. Is that the simple answer to that?
Right, the way it comes in, the way the benefit when it goes into your pay, tax is withheld. I don't want to mess things up with Mike, so maybe
2 weeks down
Yeah.
the road it is, right, Mike?
Yeah, maybe we should wait for have the
Okay.
details with Mike, but yeah, there's a difference in taxation.
There's a difference in taxation, and there may, depending on whether members stay at the Capitol Plaza or stay somewhere else, there may be incentives to do things one way or another, depending on how much you're actually spending, and the extent to which you find it burdensome to do the substantiation or not.
Senator Watson, you have a question?
Well, I guess I was just thinking of the instance with, like, if you stayed somewhere more expensive, you could be reimbursed potentially up to that amount?
Right.
Okay, makes sense.
Carry on.
All right, so now we get to, on page 10, the child dependent and elder care reimbursement. So this would be a new benefit. And this would make each member eligible to receive reimbursement equal to the actual amounts expended by the member for childcare, dependent care, or elder care services in this state, or a combination that is necessary to facilitate the member's service in the General Assembly. So if you need somebody to care for a child or other family member or older adult, so that you can come here and serve in the General Assembly, then you would be eligible to receive reimbursement for that. The total amount of the reimbursement available under this provision would be capped at the federal maximum annual household contribution limit for a dependent care flexible spending account. That amount is currently $5,000, but this would allow that to move a little bit as expenses increase the way the federal government sets that limit. So it's kind of tying it to something else, so you don't have a dollar amount that has to be revisited. Expenses shall not be reimbursed under this subdivision 4 to the extent they are being reimbursed or subsidized by another source, or if reimbursement or subsidies are reasonably available from another source. So you have to try to help yourself, or try to get assistance before putting in for reimbursement, and you can't double dip. And then,
Go ahead.
What would be an example of that? If people,
well, like, I mean, if you're eligible for the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, just, you can put in for reimbursement for the amount that is yours to pay.
versus like I'm trying to think if your employer, like if you had a separate employer or
If they
your
gave you,
partner covered the cost, it's not like that.
like, you have to actually incur the amounts. You can't say, well, childcare, they charge me this, or, my mother-in-law's providing the childcare, but if I had to get childcare in the private market, it would be X amount. It has to be actual amounts. If you're getting reimbursed in some other way.
Right. And there are
You can't
also federal
charge.
tax credits and things like that. So you can't say, this is all that I pay for childcare, and even though I get all these subsidies, I'm gonna try to get reimbursed for this whole thing. Yeah, because there's a lot of subsidies. Well, not a lot, clearly not enough, but there are subsidies for childcare and other dependent care. So this would include elder care and spousal care, and if you had an adult child with disabilities that you cared for, anybody who, right, does this tie it to the definition too?
Yes, so that's actually right.
Okay.
The definitions are coming right up, so that the definitions of childcare and dependent care are care provided to an individual who would be a qualifying individual for purposes of the federal child independent care tax credit. So again, piggybacking on the federal law for that. And elder care means care provided, this is not necessarily a federal definition, but care provided to an adult 65 years of age or older in the home or in an adult day program. So this is some kind of care for somebody who is 65 or older who needs the care in order for you to be able to come here and serve. And we can certainly look at, making any modifications to this that you want. It may be helpful to understand sort of how the FSA reimbursements work as well, because it's still reimbursing with your own money. It's just your own tax, pre-tax money. So I'm not sure that would necessarily count against somebody for the reimbursement purposes here.
Right.
Still your money paying for it. All right, and then this is a little bit of an update on the absence language under existing law. If a member is absent for reasons other than sickness or legislative business for 1 or more days while the House that they're serving in is in session, then the member is supposed to notify the Office of Legislative Operations of their absence. And under current law, expenses received shall not include the amount that the legislator specifies was not incurred. Now this says the member shall not be reimbursed for mileage, meals, or lodging expenses incurred during that period. It does not include the child care or dependent care. We can put that in if you want. I didn't because typically if you signed up for it, you have to pay for it. If you signed up for it so that you can serve in the General Assembly, they're still going to charge you.
Quick question, do you say 1 or more days?
Yes,
So if you're sick,
for reasons
What am I
other
saying?
than sickness.
reasons other than, I'm sorry, I didn't.
It's okay, yeah, it's existing law, so you're covered.
No, not get sick.
No golf days, but.
Yeah.
All right, then we have subsection C is being struck. This is actually not a change in policy. It's really just duplicative of existing law. So under existing law, in this provision, it says for attending a meeting of the Joint Fiscal Committee when the member is not getting compensation as a member of the General Assembly, so during adjournment, a member of the Joint Fiscal Committee is entitled to the same per diem compensation and reimbursement for necessary expenses as provided members of the General Assembly for attendance at sessions of the General Assembly. We already have a provision for that. I think it's the same as what's currently in 2 VSA section 23 for all members. So there's no reason to have a standalone Joint Fiscal Committee provision that says they get the same as every other member gets for attending a meeting. And then just a subsection heading on death of a member. All right, then we get into legislative leave from employment. Under existing law, now I'm on the top of page 12, any person who, in order to serve as a member of the General Assembly, under current law, it says must leave a full-time position in the employ of any employer, is entitled to a temporary or partial leave of absence so that they can perform any official duty in connection with their elected office. And that leave of absence cannot cause loss of job status, seniority, or the right to participate in insurance or other employee benefits during the leave of absence. This would take out that full-time provision, so it would apply to full-time and part-time positions as well. So I consulted with Damian Leonard, who handles our labor law provisions, and asked, should I say full-time or part-time? And he said preference would be just to take out full-time and say position, so really any position.
And this provision specifically, a number of legislators reached out to me and asked about this. In fact, I just got an email yesterday asking about this because people have had to leave their jobs to serve because they were not full-time jobs. They were not granted a leave of absence.
Or you move from a full-time to a part-time and then suddenly you lose the protection.
Yeah.
So I will just note, and you may all already know this, but the language of the statute does require some fairly advanced notice to the employer before you run. So I know sometimes members have gotten here and been surprised.
Oh, before you even run.
Let me just pull up the statute.
Oh, that's a good point. We might want to
Just
look at that a
wanna-
little bit more.
Want to flag that, not that you necessarily want to change it, but let's see, legislative leave. Yes, so an employee who intends to seek elections, this is the current law, to the General Assembly and to invoke, if elected, his or her right to a leave of absence pursuant to this subsection A that we just looked at modifying, shall notify the employer of those intentions in writing within 10 days after filing the primary election nominating petition or taking any other action required by the election laws to place their name on the primary or general election ballot. If you don't give notice as required, then you're deemed to have waived the right to a leave of absence.
Interesting. So what is the citation for that, Jen?
It is, so it's this same section. You can see the citation at the bottom of page 11, 21 VSA section 496. It's just that subsection B.
Okay. Thank you for flagging that. Look at that.
Times one that I'm aware of that this has come up or generally once a member is here and that they're having difficulties with an employer and
So that's,
they're limited by this.
okay.
Okay, and then the last substantive section before effective dates is section 5, starting on page 12. This would create a legislative service working group, and that group would, the kind of study committee, would consider issues related to serving as a member of the General Assembly. There would be 3 members of the House, excuse me, not all from the same party, appointed by the Speaker, and 3 members of the Senate, not all from the same party, appointed by the Committee on Committees. The working group will be directed to consider and make recommendations on issues involving legislative compensation and benefits, staffing, administrative support, and the length of the legislative session. And then this calls out some specifics. So look at the current compensation and benefits offered to members of the General Assembly, including whether the salaries and benefits are sufficient, and if not, how they should be increased. The impact of current salaries and benefits on recruiting and retaining members from diverse backgrounds and life experiences. Whether supplemental compensation should be provided to members who hold leadership positions in addition to the Speaker and the President pro tem, including caucus leaders and committee chairs. And how the salaries, benefits, and compensation structure in the Vermont General Assembly compare to those of other state legislatures. Whether changes to staffing are necessary, such as increasing the number of legislative staff in existing staff offices, expanding the types of legislative staff services available to members, adding caucus staff, and adding personal staff, or providing members with an allowance to hire their own personal staff. How to increase the administrative support available to members to increase their effectiveness and ability to respond efficiently to the needs of their constituents, and whether changes should be made to the length or structure of the legislative session. The working group would have the administrative, technical, and legal assistance of Mike's office, my office, and the Joint Fiscal Office. And it would provide its findings and recommendations, including any recommendations for legislative action, to the Speaker, the President pro tem, and the House and Senate GovOps committees. House one needs its name tweaked a little bit. And that would be on or before January 15th of 2024. It specifies that drafts of the report should be confidential until publicly released. As far as meetings, the Office of Legislative Operations would call the first meeting of the working group to occur on or before July 1st, 2023. This wouldn't have a chair yet. The committee would select a chair from a member among its members at the first meeting, and a majority of the membership of the working group would constitute a quorum. The working group would cease to exist after it submits its report, no later than the date it's due. And for attendance at meetings during adjournment of the General Assembly, members would get per diem compensation and reimbursement under that 2 VSA section 23 section for no more than 8 meetings. And the monies would come from the legislature's budget. And finally, we get to the effective dates. So the extension of health insurance to members and the expenses for meals, lodging, and child dependent and elder care for the Speaker and pro tem and other legislators would take effect on January 1st of 2024, so next January. The adjournment compensation provisions and the legislative leave from employment would take effect on January 1st, 2025, so for the next biennium. And section 5, the legislative service working group and the effective date section are effective on passage.
Senator Watson?
I have a functional question about adjournment. Wow. We adjourned for the weekend. No, that's not,
That's not adjournment,
okay,
right?
what do we
This
call
is like
that?
well, it's weekend adjournment, but it's not adjournment.
It's not
It's
adjournment.
not real adjournment.
We don't need to like call it something different
I think
or,
this is typically what we call it, but I can certainly run it by the secretary, Senate secretary, make sure.
so in this case, adjournment means in May.
Or
Whenever,
Yeah.
but like then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not, okay, that was, cool, all right, thanks.
Circle that, yes, so let me just circle it so that I make sure.
And for town meeting day week, we are not compensated for that week, correct?
Correct.
Correct, yeah, so we don't get expenses.
But that is also not adjournment.
But
as
that's
defined
town meeting,
here.
it's not as defined here, that's like town meeting week adjournment. Because we do a
Right.
special.
I mean, there's
adjournment.
adjournment sine die, but I'm not sure, or there's various pronunciations of Latin.
I was gonna say, what is that word?
And that happens at least at the end of the biennium, but I think that may be what I'm not sure if that's what they call it when they bang the gavel, or right before they bang the gavel, at the end of when it ends in May.
That's the adjournment.
That's the adjournment.
Exactly,
I
capital
maybe we
T,
check with Bloomer or
Yeah, we'll-
somebody
yeah.
to make sure we
Can
have
you
the
say what
right,
it's
but
called again?
sine die, it's SINE space
Yeah.
DIE.
final day, adjournment,
I
final
think
day.
so, something like that.
Ask my brother. Okay, any other questions for Jen at the moment? And I do just want to reiterate on the health benefits for if anybody out there is listening, that it wasn't the intention of those of us who sponsored it to give legislature more than other state employees get. It was supposed to be the same, but I didn't understand that when I was giving Jen instructions, so it's my error. Just in case anybody's wondering out there.
Apologies for misunderstanding, but we will, yes, we can certainly address if you take the bill up.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, thank you so much.
Sure, and I'm gonna hang out and listen to my testimony too.
Excellent. Senator Yost, are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. We just went through the bill, S32 on the legislative, or 39, I'm sorry, S39 on legislative compensation. So you are familiar with it, but if you have questions, let us know. Yeah. Mike, would you like to come on up? So, thank you for joining us. And I think what we'd like to know is sort of how things work now and whether or not the provisions in the bill are workable from your perspective, particularly the choice that legislators might have if this were to pass on how they're reimbursed or stipended for expenses. And, you know, I think we want to make sure that whatever happens, that whatever we might move forward with is feasible and not too much of an administrative burden for you and your staff.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. So take it away.
So for the record, Mike Ferrant, Director of Operations, Office of Legislative Operations. I do have a quick slideshow. It's really just to illustrate your current pay and expenses infrastructure. So what happens behind the scenes that we don't bother you with all the time. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that
Good
sounds
starting point?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna share my screen. I need to be a co-host. So that's okay. Yeah. Can everyone see that? Okay. All right. There it is. So, so it's important in this to realize that your pay and your expenses are two completely different entities in a lot of ways, and that helps to understand this. I went out of my way to color code the boxes just so that you can see that difference. No, really, like, because so your pay is processed through the Department of Human Resources via the BTHR portal, and that's just like every other state employee. When new legislators are elected during new member orientation, we onboard you and hire you as a state employee. DHR maintains those individual W-4 tax withholding information for all employees, including you. So this year, for example, the new members and I, we all did individual Zoom meetings and went through their direct deposit options and their W-4 state and federal withholding options, because Senator Norris may have different withholding than Senator Watson and Senator Hardy, based on the number of kids, the dependents and such. And payroll occurs every 2 weeks regularly throughout the state. The legislature, and this is really important too, is on a different schedule than the rest of the state employees. So for instance, yesterday, Jen Carby and I got paid for 2 weeks ago, the work we performed 2 weeks ago. We're always 2 weeks behind our paychecks. Yesterday, you all got paid through tomorrow. So you're current. And the reason, from what I understand.
Oh my gosh. Damn it. We're gonna have to make changes. I'm sorry about.
Not a problem, I don't want to hurt
EJ almost fell.
I'm gonna stop the share to make sure everyone at home knows everyone's okay.
Yeah.
her. I could have come down and hit me.
Okay.
That could have, no.
Do you need?
I got it. All right. I've already emailed David Sheets to say that we need to make some changes in the paintings, but that just confirms it, so.
So you're paid current, and the reasoning behind that is so that you don't have to wait until the end of January for your first legislative paychecks, because people come in after the holidays, and so the decision was made years ago to accelerate your pay schedule to be current. Your expenses are through a completely different department in state government and a different system. So that's through the Department of Finance and Management, and it's via the Vision portal, everyone's favorite place to go, Vision. Vision, that portal does not maintain your individual W-4 tax withholding status. So when you are paid your expense submissions, reimbursements, whatever you'd like to call them, per diems, the taxes are not withheld from that. When you do your expenses on Fridays, you get that money in gross within 3 business days. So usually by the next Monday or Tuesday after we've approved them. So keeping that difference in mind. There's also vast differences between during session and during adjournment, and adjournment being the sine die, whatever it is. Sign die that Jen was referencing, that's during the long adjournment, right? So during session, your payroll is automatic. No one does, well, you don't do timesheets. I don't do your timesheets. There are people at DHR that manually push your payroll forward every 2 weeks. And you'd have to talk with them about who does that and how much time it costs and things like that. Your session payroll is current, like I said. Your expenses for your meals and your lodging are per diems during the session right now. So those, like Jen outlined, are subject to tax withholding. And at the end of the session, we really start to withhold days of your pay, because your tax withholding occurs from your paycheck for your expenses. So you do your expenses, you get paid 3 days later, and then Vision communicates that to DHR and says, next payroll this legislator has, next paycheck, withhold $300 worth of expenses on their W-4 withholding. You have to have a paycheck coming up after that expense is paid out for those taxes to come out. If you don't, it results in a different situation that I'll outline later. During the adjournment, your pay is processed via timesheet entries that we do. And it's 1 day of per diem pay. So if you're on a study committee, your committee assistant emails me everyone that was in attendance that day, and then we enter in your timesheets for you. And then I'll email the group and say, your pay's been entered, you should expect it on this day. Because you go off of that current pay schedule. Now you're on real pay schedule. And it's on that every 2 weeks schedule again. But we enter your timesheets in for that, because it would just be, it would be more trouble to teach you how to do that and manage that than to just do it, because it's not terribly difficult. I can do it on your behalf. It's just easier. So again, I want to outline how your taxes are withheld from your expenses, because it doesn't happen from Vision. Vision pays you the gross amount, and then Vision communicates to BTHR, next payroll, next paycheck, withhold, this person submits $300 expenses, but add that to their gross pay to calculate the withholding and then take it away so you don't pay it twice. If you don't have a paycheck, it results in what's called a gross up, which means that the Office of Legislative Operations actually absorbs your tax liability. And then I reach out to people all summer with memos that say, you owe us $5.35. Please send a check to, that's the only way to reconcile it, a check to the Office of Legislative Operations and the address. I don't get a very good return on those emails over the summer and fall. Yeah. And it does result in that tax liability being absorbed by our office, which, yeah. So that's why some people say, do I have to do my expenses every Friday, Mike? And you don't have to do your expenses every Friday. But if you keep doing them every Friday, you'll always have a paycheck to withhold up front.
Yeah.
We do have members who don't do their expenses until May. And they get a big expense check, which is great. They get, whatever it is. But then that tax withholding on that $10,000 expense reimbursement, there's no paycheck to hold that against. And so we absorb that. And that can be quite a bit. And that's where it becomes troublesome and where I really try to discourage people from doing that.
Is there anything we can do to help you?
Do your expenses every Friday.
Well, I mean,
Um,
a requirement that, I didn't realize that happened and that you were absorbing that expense.
It's about 12 to 15 legislators each year. And it's just for taxable. I may take you up on that one. But that's really why we harp on that every Friday. And so we're here to help out. It's a lot easier to do 1 week of them versus 15 weeks of them at once, and so on and so forth. So I'm gonna leave the Zoom because I don't need to share my screen anymore. I don't think, just so that there's less up there. As Jen was outlining the bill, some of the questions that came up that I can answer. So we don't collaborate with or communicate with any hotel about their rates or our reimbursement rates. But your reimbursement rates are set by the federal GSA, which is a public website. And that's, I go to it, I see what it is for 2023 for the city of Montpelier. And then I craft your payroll memo that I send out to you. So this is how much you get. I communicate that to the folks at Vision. They build it into the templates that you use to do your expenses. That publicly available information is available to the management of all the hotels in the area. And so my guess is that they probably set their legislative rates, which is less than the normal rate, but they probably set it at that reimbursement amount. I wouldn't venture to guess whether they know that your expenses are taxable or not, but that's probably where that comes from, because not every hotel around here sets about $134 per night. Yeah, I'm sure it's I'm sure there's method behind that. That is because it does year after year match up.
Yeah, but you're right, it's publicly available. They don't have to call you and ask. It's
And they
just
don't,
on the
yeah.
website, yeah.
They go there.
And then the question, I think we got it answered about the timing of the federal tax change that may or may not happen.
Mhm.
But even if the federal tax changes, having the option for the type, either a reimbursement or a stipend
Mhm.
would still be workable.
Yeah, so in Vision now, you can do it today if you wanted to. You could put in for non-taxable expenses. What you'd notice is that there would be no amount
Mhm.
pre-filled in on that line, it's still an option. You can drop that expense type menu down and find non-ledge, non-taxable room.
Mhm.
And you could enter in your room amount and submit that. We would probably send it back to you because it wouldn't line up with your statute and things like that. But the technology exists, so there wouldn't need to be a change to the system to allow that. The dependent care one, we would probably have to build in some new expense type, which we've done before. We did during the pandemic. There was a remote expense type that we built into that, or Vision built into that system. And before the session, they create templates for you. That's why when you log in to do your expenses, it says, do you want to do it for all days? And it gives you your 3 types, and then it just builds that big mess for you.
Right.
Most people that enter expenses in Vision don't have that. They have to do all of the coding types themselves.
And would people who choose the non-taxable option, the reimbursement option, have to submit receipts or documentation of some kind, and how would that work?
So there is a way in Vision to upload a PDF of a receipt, including if you took a picture of it, right?
Okay.
I think it takes PDFs and JPEGs. I wouldn't want to deal with the receipts. I wouldn't want 180 receipts to go through every week. That'd be very taxing. Vision itself has a built-in.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. Vision itself has a attestation against the pains and penalties of perjury that this is accurate built into it that you have to check. You have to, before you can submit your expenses, you have to manually check that and then submit it, which is why my staff won't do expenses for legislators, because we're not going to attest that you're telling the truth or not. So that's why we make you do it on your own. And the system won't let us actually, you can't do it for delegates. So, though I think that would satisfy it just fine. So, yeah.
Okay, so it wouldn't be a situation of saving your grocery receipts if you go to the Shaw's in town to buy food for yourself.
Right, but you would have to keep track of it,
Yeah.
and so you'd have to keep track of how much did I spend for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then add all that up, I would imagine. Or you could do this a non-taxable meal option, and you could just make sure that that was always underneath the per diem amount.
Okay, Senator Watson.
I don't think that this situation is likely to arise, but supposing that there was a legislator who didn't have a cell phone with a camera, like folks can get help with IT or, doing their, expense reporting. Theoretically, someone could bring those receipts. I mean, maybe there's I'm hoping that there'd be some way for them to get help uploading those receipts here.
There's a scanner in the legislative line, so we bring over to scan them on there.
And so you wouldn't need to, so even if someone didn't have the capacity on their own, they could be helped to so that you don't have any additional paper that you're trying to hang on to or keep track of.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
I don't know how necessary receipts would be when you already have to attest
Okay.
to the accuracy of
So-
the report.
Because something I feel like I thought I heard you say was that there's a place right now where you could upload receipts. So you wouldn't even necessarily be requiring that. You'd just be trusting that people are, you don't even want people to upload receipts necessarily. You just want people to say, this is what I spent, and we're gonna trust that that is true.
I believe that this version of the bill gave me the authority to dictate how you do that.
Oh, okay.
And so I would use that authority to say, please don't submit receipts. Your attestation is fine.
Okay, even the uploaded JPEGs or PDFs or anything.
I would urge you not to.
Okay, thank
I would say that's not necessary.
Okay, all right, that's helpful.
And if you decide to do anyways for your own, you can. Some people decide on their own to put a really lengthy explanation into every single line of their expenses. And that's fine, they can do that.
Yeah.
I tell them that they don't have to. And they say, no, if I ever get called out, I want to have something to go back to. And, okay, great,
Okay,
go for it.
yeah.
And without the receipts, would that pass an audit muster? Like if the legislature were audited, if if there are not receipts along, would the attestation be enough for an auditor?
I wouldn't know to speak to that. I'd talk to either the auditor's office or ledge counsel, because I don't know if you're subject to audits like that.
I don't know.
Well, I think we would want to look at what is required under the accountable plan requirements to qualify for the non-taxable status. There's, so whether you have to actually submit something to substantiate or whether a claim is sufficient. So I think would say depending on what the IRS regulations are around that,
Yeah, okay.
may dictate some of what's required.
And is that a ledge council question or a JFO question?
It's probably a ledge council question, is more about tax law than,
Okay,
so yeah, I'll follow up with Abby.
okay, that would be great.
She or I will.
Senator North?
Quick question. Mike just helped me out the other day to streamline everything for me. It works much better now, filling out all the dates. I've been doing it so
Yes.
wrong for a couple of years now, but so when I do mine every Friday morning, send them over, you get paid 3 days later, that's great. But your travel is not taxed, right?
Yeah, correct.
So when you get now as a one lump sum here, I mean, obviously that does create more work for you as far as, he's got like $45.85. That's not taxed.
So the system does that for you.
The system does that for you. Because my biggest problem is concern. I know you may find this all hard to believe, but making too much money. Okay. Because until I'm on Social Security,
Yeah.
so not taxing the gas really helps me as far as paying back the dollar for every $2 that I make, and my dollar gets taxed versus their dollar doesn't, obviously. And this year I'll have to rectify that problem by hitting that magic number here. So I have to worry about it next year.
I've had legislators come to me with similar issues. And what they did to reconcile that was they went into their W-4 tax withholding options and added, say like withhold an extra $200 from each paycheck.
I have additional withheld on mine, not $200, but I do have additional taken out, so.
Yep.
Then it was after this year, we have to worry about it.
The, if you, next time you do your expenses, at the very end, after you checked the box to attest, and then you say submit, there's a little confirmation box that pops up. And that box will say your total amount of expenses. And then on the right, it says the taxable amount of your expenses. And it already does the calculation for you. And so it says like $400 for your expenses, but only 300 of it's taxable. That's accounting for the 100 that's not taxable. Yep.
Cool.
During the adjournment period, when members are on study committees or joint committees and do expenses, we do shift to that. It's not an accountable plan, but we do shift to that real amount. So you don't get $69 for the day when you come in for a 1 hour study committee meeting in the summer. You get the $10 you spent for lunch, right? So people do that. We use different coding, we help them out with it, but there are no tax withholdings from that.
Oh,
So,
okay,
and there's no receipts required for it either,
okay,
because there's that attestation.
got it, okay. And with the provisions in the bill that are related to off-session compensation and off-session compensation, are those workable? And how would that be a problem? Would that be a problem or not?
So I don't know. I'd have to do a little bit more research on that, because I thought about, who's entering that, who's doing that work.
Yeah.
So right now during the session, no one enters your timesheets. You're set up in some, I'd have to ask them more about it, but you're set up in some auto pay system where it just happens. I don't do your timesheets, you don't do your timesheets. If someone's out and says, like I had a member who said, Mike, I have a pre-planned vacation, I can't get out of it, or a pre-planned obligation, I won't be in next week, so I don't want to get paid for it. So to not pay you, we have to do action. But if they pay you, we don't have to do any action. I would imagine that if that's already set up for the session, it should be able to be set up for adjournment too, if it was everyone getting it every week, right? So it might not be any work, it might be nothing. But if we have to enter 180 timesheets every 2 weeks, that is work. It's not the end of the world, but it's work, and it's work that puts us in jeopardy too, because we're entering your time, and what if I forget, or I'm keeping a list and someone calls me and I get lost track and I forget Senator Watson, so she's gonna call me and go, where's my $163 you owe me for this weekend? Oh, I forgot. And now it's on me to do her timesheet again, so I'll probably put timesheet entry onto all of you.
Mhm.
And it would be your responsibility, if you want that year-round pay, to do your timesheets every 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And then we would review them like we do for several offices here every 2 weeks. We approve
Mhm.
timesheets for 55 staff every 2 weeks as it is right now. So we'd probably just lump 180 you into that
Mhm.
and approve them as we go.
Okay.
I can definitely see misentries. I can definitely see people saying, can I play catch up? I missed last month, can I catch up on that? That becomes a lot of work. That becomes a lot of work. So I'd probably put that onto the members and say, you have to do your own timesheets if you want to get your pay.
Okay. Are there other questions for Mike? Yes, Senator Watson.
I am interested in this thing that happens where people don't put their expenses in until the very end and then there is no paycheck. And so the office just has to absorb some amount of money that, I don't know if there's a legislative fix for that, but I just want to put it out there that seems like
Yeah.
there should be, or maybe not should be a legislative fix, but there should be some kind of fix, and I don't, it's not obvious to me how to do that, but, you have ideas.
Yeah, I would love that. And explaining it to people in June, because, I mean, for those of you that are new, the feeling in May when adjournment happens, sign and die, I mean, people blow out, people disconnect, like, you don't want to see emails
yeah.
from Mike Ferrant in June. And then you see one from Mike Ferrant in June and it's, hey, you owe us money, and then I'm trying to explain it.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you waited to do your expenses and it's just a lot.
Yeah.
And people call, and you know, when I say $5.35, I've emailed people like, you owe us $1.08, like $1.08, like, send me a check, please, you know?
Yeah.
Do you have Venmo?
Well, and I've worked with DHR about it, and there's no easy way to do it, because people have said, I've got cash
Yeah.
in the mail, or people are here and they're like, here's my card. The only way to do it is through a check, because it has to go through our accounts payable receivable system,
Wow.
so.
Mm.
So legislative operations is not on Venmo.
Yeah.
No, we are not. I mean, Mike is, but. But, you know, just doing those expenses every week or keeping current with them as much as you can is really the best way to go. And it keeps money flowing into your account as you go forward too. It keeps that tax liability kind of in check. It makes your net payroll more regular. So there's benefits all around. You know, it's just doing it.
Okay, well, keep thinking about that, and if there's something we can do, either like in statute or just personally. I mean, I'll talk to the 15 people.
I'll produce the list.
I don't know
When you
if
see the
that's
list-
like breaking their confidentiality or whatever.
When you see the list, you would say, I don't want to go talk to those people.
We are live on YouTube. So for both you and Jen, are there, I have written down, we probably want to hear from DHR.
I would.
And would that be the commissioner, or is there somebody who you would recommend that we hear from?
I'd probably start with the commissioner,
Okay.
but talk about the VTHR. I think if you reference VTHR, they have specific people, or payroll. They
Okay,
have specific people dedicated to that.
okay. And then anyone else that you can think of?
Probably the vision support team. That's through the Department of Finance and Management.
Okay. Might you be able to get us
Yeah.
some names?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That would be great for both BTHR and Vision.
I can reach out to
That
them.
we could have them come in and talk to us about it.
Mhm.
We are gonna hear from NCSL as soon as we're done.
That's great.
Yeah, are there others that you can think of, Jen, that we might want to hear from with any of this? Department of Tax, I don't know, or just have Abby in, or,
You might want to have Abby and you can ask her some more detailed questions about the tax aspects. I think that probably makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would certainly, when you're having folks from DHR and I would talk to them about the insurance, health insurance pieces.
Okay, yeah.
Um,
And the SCA may want to cover since they bargain the health insurance for state employees, right? So,
Yes, but for example, none of your staff are members of the union
so
either, but it's
you
all,
all, yeah,
we're all exempt employees.
you're all exempt employees and you just
The whole
get whatever the equivalent is that's been bargained. Okay.
It's the same, I mean, we're on the same plan, but they will want to know, particularly in case it's likely to change change premiums to add, it's 180 additional lives. I don't know if it tends to skew healthier or less healthy, but, and a conversation you should have as well that we may want to address in here is about coverage for family members and who would pay for that.
So, okay.
So under this particular proposed bill, I see where it tasks the General Assembly for paying for the health insurance. Is that just during the session? Because when I checked into dental, it said, yeah, you can do this, you need to pay those monthly. When you're not in session, you need to
Right,
pay
you
those.
pay in full for your dental. So we don't get, I think the idea, if we're going to sort of revisit the payment for the health insurance piece would
Right.
be to have you pay the employee share. So right now, I think it's an 80-20, or in a lot of cases, an 80-20 split where the employer pays 80% and you would pay 20%. So assuming you wanted to keep the coverage in place, I imagined it would be for the whole year. It doesn't make a lot of sense from an insurance perspective to drop somebody off insurance in half the year, let them get really sick and come back on in January and cost a lot more.
So who would have those numbers?
For what the premiums are?
Yeah.
Well, DHR has them. They're available on their website. I can also send them to you. But I think you would, to the extent they're able to forecast whether there is likely to be any impact on premiums from adding this.
I'm not eligible for any of this stuff, so.
Well, but you might be eligible for, I don't know if you're on I don't know what you're on right now, but depending on what you're on, you may be eligible for a kind of a wrap benefit in addition to what you have. We can talk on.
Yeah, let's get into the details of individual
What if I want
cases.
to?
Go ahead, Mike.
The only thing that's not in the bill, that John reviewing, is that the effective dates, so all of these things would be effective next January 1st, but the report from the working group isn't due until January 15th.
Right. So the working group was put in there as a sort of holding place
Okay.
for whatever we don't get to this session. We would ask the working group to look at. So if we do quote unquote solve the problem or do something with something, we could take it off the questions that we asked the working group. So I think it was more or less a placeholder of figuring that we're gonna need some report back.
Yeah, but most of the things that are in the charge of the working group are not being affected by what's in the bill as introduced. So
Yeah,
there's still certainly room, if you don't address them during the session, room for that group to be looking at salaries and benefits and.
right, because it's broader, the salaries is broader than the off session pay and the benefits are broader than that, yeah.
So you may need
go
or
ahead.
want to hear from somebody representing employers on this idea of legislative leave from part-time
Oh,
employment
yeah.
and any additional changes you may make around notice.
Who would that be? Because there's so many different employers.
Yeah, I know. I think there are some employer groups. I mean, the Vermont Chamber of Commerce comes in on.
Yes, you are maybe.
Yep, yes, BR may have a different take, but that's good to have different perspectives.
Okay,
I think BBSR, I might have inverted those letters.
okay.
BBSR, I think you got it right. Department of Labor, I don't know if they would have a
Okay,
take as people who
All
are
right.
employers.
I can put out a call and see who wants to. Senator Watson.
So about the health insurance aspect of this, so it says the premiums for extending insurance coverage to members of General Assembly shall be paid, sorry, this is on page 4. Premiums for extending insurance coverage to members of the General Assembly shall be paid in full by the General Assembly. So I just want to make sure that this is not compelling us to pay for everyone to have insurance if they're not opting into it. Does that make sense? Like, because
You wouldn't pay a premium for somebody who wasn't enrolling, but this is the piece that I know the chair wants to revisit because she had not intended the.
Right, and I'm gonna reiterate
format.
that now the press is in the room, which is that the intention was never to have the legislature get more of a benefit than
Right.
other state employees, that we would be mirror whatever state
Right.
employees are, and this is drafted that the legislature would pay for the whole thing.
right.
But my understanding is
Okay.
other state employees get an 80-20 split, so that's
Okay.
what this
Oh,
was
I see.
intended to.
Okay.
And it would be for only people who enroll. So
Right.
for me, I get
Oh,
my health
okay.
insurance somewhere else
Okay.
through my spouse. So
Right.
it's not like the legislature would
Right.
pay for my health insurance.
Right, it's not an allowance, it's a
Right.
pay
So-
directly.
So the language, like, well, we'll work on the language, but it's
Yeah.
not, it doesn't, okay, it wouldn't be automatically paying for
Correct.
everybody. Okay.
Correct. And
You'd
so,
have to-
yeah, if we need to make it more clear, to make it so anybody who opts in or
Right,
whatever,
right.
we can, I defer to legislative council on
Okay,
what
we
we
can
need to
figure it
say
out.
in there,
Okay,
but,
great, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Senator White, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair Hardy. Since we have Mike in the chair, I'm wondering, I'm always trying to understand what the financial barriers are to folks serving. And I'm wondering if you have any sense, because your role is to talk pretty candidly with folks about their financial situation. And we did have a legislature who very publicly is stepping down today due to the financial circumstances of this role. I'm wondering if you could just reflect on how often you have that conversation where folks are truly saying, I cannot do this job, I cannot afford to be here. If that comes up as often as it feels like it does to me, for you as someone who has a staff role.
It's a good one because anecdotally, in the 5 years I've been here, I've heard legislators say a myriad of things about their pay. Some say, this is public service and you shouldn't get rich on that, right? It's part of the game, right? It's part of the deal of public service is that you don't get paid much. And then legislators say, I'm not in this for the pay, no one should be. And I've also had legislators say, this is costing me so much money. What can I do to maximize? What am I entitled to and how can I maximize all of that? And I've seen legislators really struggle with. I've had legislators say, what's the cheapest hotels around? So that can be supplemental income for me. We've had legislators come and request cash advances for expenses, which is a process and vision that you can do, where just up front puts money into the account and then you pay it off with your expense reports week after week. And so that's happened. I wouldn't say I've heard any legislator in 5 years say that this is the best paying job they've ever had. I have not heard anyone express total satisfaction in the pay package that serving in the General Assembly affords. Whatever, it hasn't all been bad, and it hasn't all been, this is, I've had a lot of people say, I'm retired and this is my second, this is how I give back. I've had people say, I don't have to work, this is my role, and it's fun. And so I don't want to paint the picture that it's all bad for everyone, but there's definitely more that expresses concerns about it lately in the last couple of years than before.
Thank you.
Senator Bielanski?
I don't have a question, I just have a sort of response to what Senator White brings up, and I think it's about representation. You hear from legislators that have made it here, that have figured out some sort of way to afford to be here, but I hear from community members who are like, yeah, I'd love to do that, but I can't afford to be there. So thinking about who our communities are comprised of and who can't actually even get in the building, I think is also critically important in that sort of calculus as we think about representative democracy.
Yeah, I think that's important, and we will hear from, I just wrote down it, to remind myself, from legislators who have had to leave service because they couldn't afford it anymore, and I think it's, members from all the parties and all, gender identities, and so it's really a pretty diverse group of people who tried and couldn't make it work because of the compensation or the benefits or the time or whatever it is. So we will hear from some of them. And if you know any personally who you think would like to testify, let me know and I can compile a representative list of people who might be willing. I don't know if everybody will want to, but yeah. Well, we are already behind schedule and we have NCSL waiting. So I'm gonna say thank you, Mike and Jen. You can obviously stick around if you want and hear what NCSL has to say. But we will probably get back to you in terms of if we have other questions or things we want to run by you. So
Great, thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Thank you for having us.
yeah.
Good for getting your expenses done today.
I know.
Yay.
I did it while you were testifying.
Thank you so much.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, hey Jocelyn.
Hi.
Sorry to keep you waiting. We were having a very extremely interesting conversation about expense reporting with our legislative operations staff. So thank you for joining us today. We just went through the bill S39 and we were hoping to get from you an overview of sort of what other states are doing, a national perspective on legislative compensation and benefits. And so I'll turn it over to you in a minute. I'm going to just have us all introduce ourselves so you know who you're talking with. So I'm Senator Ruth Hardy and here in Vermont, I represent the Addison District.
Olivia Parker, the committee assistant.
Senator Tanya Biehowski, I represent the Chittenden Central District.
Rebecca White, Windsor County District.
Bob Norris, Franklin County.
In Watson, Washington.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
So there you go. And we also have our chief counsel for the legislative council in the room with us, who's just walked us through the bill. And we also have a local reporter with us. And who knows who is watching us online. So why don't you introduce yourself and just take it away. And if you need to share your screen, I think you've gotten permission from Olivia, and her slides, Jocelyn's slides are also up on our website if people want to look at them.
All right, yeah. Give me just a second. Let me make sure I'm able to share this correctly. Trick. All right, can everyone see it?
Yes, excellent.
Awesome, excellent, good. We're already off to a great start. So my name is Jocelyn Williams, and I'm a policy specialist with the National Conference of State Legislatures, and then specifically the Center for Legislative Strengthening. And for those who don't know, NCSL is an organization that serves state legislatures, both members and people who are working in state legislatures as well. Before I get started, I want to thank you, Senator Hardy, and the rest of the committee for allowing me to give testimony here today. I do appreciate the opportunity. So I do have a little bit put together about legislative compensation and some of the other topics that are covered in the bill you guys are considering. So when we think about legislator compensation, it can be comprised of several different things. And this include things like salary, per diem and mileage, additional compensation for leadership positions, office and staffing, and insurance benefits and retirement benefits. Salary is what legislators get paid. Most states do an annual salary, but other states do a per diem salary based on session length. And per diem and mileage is going to also vary from state to state, and as will all these other factors as well. So the compensation that people will get for being in a leadership position, that'll vary state from state, and eligibility for things like insurance and retirement benefits are going to vary from state to state. And why I bring up all these different components is because I think a lot of times when people first think about legislative compensation, they think about salary and salary alone. And here at NCSL, our research has shown that compensation can be broad with all these other components of compensation involved as well. Do you guys want to save questions to the end, or do you want to ask questions as we go through?
I think we'll save them until the end unless there's some clarifying.
Clarifying questions, perfect, sounds good. I always think it's best to ask though what the preference is.
Yeah, thanks.
So when we think about annual legislator salary, and as you were asking about what is going on in different states, there's really quite a range from a salary of no salary whatsoever, which would be the state of New Mexico, to in 2022, California having the highest legislator salary at just under $120,000. However, those two extreme ends don't really represent what's going on in all states. The average or mean legislator state salary is just under $40,000, and the median salary is just above $30,000. So that can kind of give you an idea of where that spread is in terms of legislator salary. And to help better exemplify this, here is a graph, and you can go back and probably spend more time looking at it if you want to review the slides. And it shows where all the different states fall in terms of legislator salary. And what I'd like you to take away from looking at this graph is that while there are some states that do have a salary below $20,000, and there are some states that have salaries above $60,000, the bulk of legislator salaries are falling somewhere between $20,000 and $60,000.
So Vermont wasn't on there, just so we know. I didn't, or my,
I didn't see it on.
Oh, so that'd be a mistake on our part. Oh, these are, let me clarify. These are annual legislator salaries. It's difficult to kind of like put in this graphic states that do per diem or other like session-based salaries, and so that's why Vermont is not on there. So these are states that are just annual salaries.
Got it. And we have another clarifying question from Senator Clarkson.
Thank you, Jocelyn. So time expectation for service, of course, there's salary, but there's also time expectation of service. So some legislatures are shorter, some are longer. I mean, I think there needs to be, I assume you're going to talk about this coming up because all salaries are not equal amount of time expectation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll get to that a little bit more on my next slide. So it's a great preview. So when we're thinking about pay structures, 8 states, including Vermont, do not have an annual salary, and they make decisions to tie to things like session days, calendar days, or session weeks. Examples are Utah, which gives $285 a legislative day, and Nevada, which gives $164.69 per calendar day for up to 60 days. So coming back to the point that was made about time expectations and salaries is yes, every state legislature is different, and there's going to be different time expectations and state legislatures in terms of work. And there is a relationship between the time of a session length, or what is the quote we use, and salary. So at NCSL, we typologize legislatures as full-time, part-time, and hybrid being kind of in between a full-time legislature and a part-time legislature. And that's signified on this map by the states that are in green would be considered full-time legislatures, and the states that are in yellow or gold are part-time legislatures, and the gray ones are hybrid. And typically when we think about full-time legislatures, we know that they have higher legislator salary, but they tend to have be in session year-round or have longer session lengths. And they typically also have larger staffing and staffing resources, whereas and more frequently than not, people serving in these full-time legislatures will not have another job outside of legislative service. The things change a little bit when we look at these part-time legislatures, again, the ones that are signified by the yellow and gold. We know here that legislative salary is lower. You can see that by the bullet points on the side, which says the average salary of a full-time legislature is around $76,000, and the average salary of a part-time legislature is around $13,000. And some other characteristics of part-time legislatures tends to be shorter session lengths, and less staffing and resources. And often members hold employment outside of serving in the legislature as well.
Senator Bielanski, do you have a?
Yeah, I'm curious about the small staff piece and if that is like overall legislative staff or if that's individual legislators' staff.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'm happy to look into that and get back to you on that if that'd be of interest to you.
Yeah, and I'm just curious because particularly Vermont, I would expect it to be in the small staff, given that we have no staff. So I was confused about how that was differentiated.
Like we have shared staff, which is also the different.
Yeah, okay, yeah, like I said, I just know just in terms of, and staffing is going to vary from state to state, and it can even vary from chamber to chamber as well. And so I don't have a specific answer to that. We just know that in terms of staffing available in the legislature, there tends to be larger staffing and resources available in full-time legislatures. Did that help answer the question at all?
Kind of. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're not dealing with staffing specifically right now, but when or if we do, it would be great if you have more data on that.
Okay,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, and also, so in thinking about, I'm using 4 states here to kind of exemplify the different legislative typologies. So we have California, which is kind of an example of a full-time legislature, and Colorado, which is a good example of a part-time legislature. And then we included New Hampshire and Maine because they are Vermont's neighbors, and they also are part-time legislatures. Colorado is a hybrid legislature. And so I'll be going, I apologize. I'll be going across the various components of compensation, so salary, additional compensation, healthcare, and retirement benefits across these 4 different states to show how it can really vary. So when we look at salary, we can see that there's that kind of the typical variation that I talked about before, whereas in a full-time legislature like California, they have a salary of around $120,000. In a hybrid legislature like Colorado, the salary is around $40,000. And what I think is interesting is if you look at variation in the part-time legislatures, is you can have a state like New Hampshire that's only getting $100 a year per salary, which is vastly different than Maine that gets a little over $15,000 for the first regular session and then close to $11,000 for the second regular session. And similarly, you can see that variation difference in terms of additional compensation for leadership as well. So, and I'm not going to go through and read all the numbers on all these different slides. They are available to you, and I'm happy to answer questions on them. But again, it's the same trend that we saw before, that in states like California, there tends to be larger compensation for leadership positions as opposed to like a state like New Hampshire. And perhaps in our hybrid states, it's kind of in between. So similar pattern. Any questions on this?
Nope.
I just always ask. I always figure it's better to ask. Now I'm going to move into talking about mileage and per diem, and a few things that I want to bring up and I always tell people about with mileage and per diem is there's no single way to approach per diem and mileage. Every state handles it differently. Many states tie mileage to the federal rate, but not all states do. And variations on per diem includes difference between general daily compensation for per diem, getting specific amounts for specific items, like a certain amount for lodging, a certain amount for food. Some states do the same per diem for everyone. Some states, particularly in larger, like geographically larger states, there might be a different per diem based on distance away from the capital. And in some states, there's different compensation amounts for senators and representatives. Another difference might be the use of vouchered or unvouchered per diem and how people are expected to spend that. And then finally, and this is especially prevalent after the 2018 Tax Cuts and Job Acts, is the idea of tax and untaxed per diem. In some states, they have per diems set up in a way that it can still be considered untaxed, but in other states, per diem is taxed as part of income. So that is a big difference across states. I wouldn't say there's a pro or a con to any certain way. Each state creates programs that work best for its state dynamics. Any questions before I move on?
No, we just had a long conversation of about the tax versus untaxed and how that works, so. I think
So you guys are probably more experts on it than I am at this point.
No, it's just good to be, to reaffirm that this is an issue that other places are talking about as well.
It's been a hard transition for some of us.
Yeah.
So here in comparison, I'd say mileage is the area where there's the least variation across state legislatures or across typologies of state legislatures. As you can see, most states except for Maine, either tied to the federal rate or match the federal rate when it comes to mileage. In terms of per diem, though, again, it can be really variable with states like New Hampshire that has no per diem, to Colorado, which as it has two different, because of the size of Colorado, it's only $45 a day for people living within 50 miles of the capital, but people who are living further have a larger per diem, and that's voucher. And so there's going to have to be some tracking of the expenses with per diem used. And California, which even though it's a large state, has the same amount for everyone in terms of per diem, although it varies between senators and representatives. There's differences.
The representatives get $3 more. That's kind of weird. Must have been a House bill.
But also $3?
It's really not worth the fight.
Isn't some of the difference here is that the mileage is set federally? So I mean, that's why everybody uses the same thing.
Yeah, so I mean, states aren't required just to follow the federal mileage rate. They can choose to set their own mileage reimbursement, as you can see the Maine is doing. But for practice, I'd say a fair number of states just choose to keep their mileage, the mileage rate same as the federal rate.
Right, so there is no federal rate for per diem for food and drink.
Yeah.
Or lodging, but so there's an explanation.
There is.
It's what our current law is tied
Yeah,
to.
it's based on the Federal Register of Expenses for each area.
That's just where it's published, but yes, the Office of Personnel or something.
Yeah, and we talked about this before you were.
There's a GSA.
Sorry,
Person,
I
yeah.
apologize.
GSA
No, you're
rate.
fine.
That's what.
Budget adjustment.
So, but it does look like a lot of states are not using the federal rate for mileage or for meals and lodging, because the $38 per day or the $32 per day that Maine uses, for example, or even the $45 that Colorado uses is really low.
Yeah, that gets you breakfast and half a lunch.
So states are clearly just coming up with their own numbers on a lot of these things.
Right.
Yeah, and different considerations. So a state like Colorado that's putting in the stipulation of within 15 miles. I can't speak to why specifically why Colorado decided to do that, but I think it's safe to guess that with the stipulation within 50 miles, we're thinking about the residents of the legislature or the legislator in terms of the capital and the burden it's putting on them to get to the capital.
Yeah, oh, I see. So it's a total reimbursement of $45 per day if you live within 50 miles for both food and lodging. And then if you're further away, it's $234 a day.
Yes.
I see. Okay,
Right.
well, that makes more sense. Okay.
Or not.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
The other area that you can see some variation is in terms of additional benefits, in terms of both health insurance and retirement benefits. And several states, as you can see with the the health insurance, that legislators are eligible for the same health care plan that other states' employees do, but there might be differences in terms of how much is covered by the state. So for instance, say in New Hampshire, they're eligible for the health insurance plan, the same as the state employees, but at the legislator's expense, as compared to state like California or Colorado, where it's the same as the state employees, and the state pays a portion and legislators pay a portion. So you can see variations on, who is paying for that health insurance plan. In terms of retirement benefits, it's the same thing. Some states don't have retirement benefits, a retirement benefits plan available, and some states do, and it doesn't always match up with legislature typology. As you can see here on this chart, California does not have a retirement plan available for its state legislators, but Maine and Colorado do.
Just,
But
can I just ask?
Yeah, Senator Clarkson.
Yeah.
Sorry, just before we leave sort of the compensation piece, what do you, off the top of your head, know when New Hampshire set its $100 a year? Because if it was set in 1790, that was a lot of money. If it was, because it's just stayed the same, but I don't know when it was set, because when it was set.
It was the original compensation. I don't think it's ever changed.
Yes.
I don't know if it's the original compensation, but I know that it's not changed in over 100 years.
Yes, so correct. So it is very interesting that the New Hampshire legislators have chosen not to actually true that up to current values.
Yeah.
Because that would have made a huge difference if they had done that.
Yeah, so I'd say it's been about over 100 years ago, and so that's just like, and when we think about that, there's different reasons for why states choose to update salaries or don't choose to update salaries, and some of it has to do with, so I'm sure many of you can recognize the political stress and pressure around, changing or amending legislative salaries, but also to do with things like culture in the state and what the state values in terms of how they perceive legislative service and how they perceive compensation of legislative service, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, carry on. Thank you.
No problem. So the next thing that I want to talk about is legislative service and outside employment, as I know that's one of the issues you're considering. Typically, those serving in full-time legislatures are less likely to have outside employment because of time constraints and or salary level, but that doesn't mean that there isn't anyone it doesn't mean that there aren't people in full-time legislatures who do also have additional outside employment. And it also doesn't mean that those who are serving in part-time legislatures for sure have outside employment. It really does vary in each institution. One thing to know is no state bans employment outside of the legislature generally. So there's no state that really has a rule where it's like if you're serving the state legislature, you cannot be employed. Now, some states do have constraints on public employment and legislative service because of conflict of interest. So if you held a certain government job prior to spreading legislative service, you might have to resign from that job in order to continue legislative service. But there's not a state that has any sort of straight up ban on employment in general during legislative service. And we looked up data in 2019, and I will be updating this data this year and get you more updated data. But in 2019, 16 states have had legislative leave laws to protect outside employment during legislative service. And so this basically means that the state has some sort of law that says if somebody is serving in their state legislature, they can't lose their job while they're performing legislative service. 10 of these states cover private and public employees, and 6 of these 16 states only cover public employees. So the scope of that protection for legislative leave really does vary state to state, but there are also several states that don't have any protection whatsoever for employment outside of legislative work for people serving in the legislature.
Okay. And do these states have some kind, the 16 states that do have some kinds of protections, do they have a notification of when they have to notify? Do you know?
I do not know that off the top of my head. I apologize. I can look into that for you if you want that help, if there's some sort of notification requirement. Oops.
Yeah, because we are one of the 16 states that have something and we have a notification, but it's pretty far in advance of
Okay.
notification. So be interesting to know what others.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I can put that on my docket for things to look into this spring. That'd be great information for NCSL to have as well, about the nuances of everybody's legislative leave requirements as well.
Yeah, Senator Vygotsky has a question.
Yeah, in those nuances, the other one that comes up to me is part-time versus full-time protection, because that's actually what our bill is dealing with.
Right, excuse me, yeah, that's true. Because we have the full-time protection, but not part-time in the bill.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Okay, yeah, so that's the nuance right there. Yeah, if you guys are curious in the nuances and legislative leave laws, I'd be happy to look into that for you and give you a little bit more information about kind of the meat and bones of everybody's legislative leave laws.
Okay, great, thank you.
And kind of related, I don't have it on a slide here. Several states also do have protections that if somebody is works as a lawyer while doing legislative service, they can get continuances on any of the cases that they are responsible for representing, so there's not a conflict between the court dates and legislative work as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly the lobby by lawyers.
Yeah.
So the last slide I have for you is on legislative service and caregiving. And several states actually address balancing caregiving and legislative service both formally and informally. And I was not, to the best of my research, able to find any states right now currently that have a law, statute, or provision that designates reimbursement for childcare. But there are some other things that are related to that. In 2022, the Colorado Assembly passed 12 weeks of paid leave, family leave for members. So in Colorado, if a member needs to take family leave during legislative service, they're able to do that and continue to receive their legislative salary during that time. There's also a lot of chamber rules to accommodate caregiving. So things like sick leave and extended absences are often permitted for people who are dealing with caregiving. Several states allow children on chamber floors. There are states that provide nursing rooms in legislative buildings for people to use. And the Massachusetts Senate has a rule specifically addressing paid parental leave. So that's not being addressed, that's just more in chamber rules. And it's also important to note that some states allow for the use of campaign funds for childcare as well. In 2022, Oregon started considering a law that would that had to deal with childcare benefits for legislators as well.
Does this, are there any states that specifically have provisions for family care more broadly, elder care or dependent adult care or spousal care?
To the best of my knowledge, no, other than Colorado. Colorado's paid family leave was not specifically for children or for people who had just given birth. It was the idea that it was family leave for somebody who needs to take family leave. Now, most of the focus has been on, of course, more traditional uses of family leave, but it wasn't written specifically as like maternity leave or parental leave, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
That's great.
Because the leave thing that we have, or I'm sorry, the reimbursement that we have in the bill would be for all of those
Right.
possibilities. We have legislators on sort of all ends, both ends, all ends of that spectrum. You can't have more than two ends of the spectrum.
With every
but
type.
We have lots of people on different parts of that spectrum.
Absolutely.
Senator Vygotsky.
I am wondering, and maybe you don't know, but I'd love to hear if you do, if there has been an uptick in states examining hybrid participation or sort of the learnings from COVID to be more flexible in some of these areas, and if you're seeing that change in any spaces.
So NCSL does have some information on that. Unfortunately, I'm not the person who is the research expert on that, so I am not able to speak to that today. But if you would like more information, about hybrid remote participation and how COVID is impacting remote participation, I can connect you with somebody who can share that information.
Thank you.
Great. Senator Clarkson, do you have a question?
No, I was just thinking of other benefits that might not have been captured here. You know, continuing education, reimbursement, or, you know, just more unusual benefits that legislators around the country might have, but I haven't thought it out well enough for a full question. But this is helpful.
Yeah, this is
Thank you,
great. Are
Jocelyn.
there any other question? If you want to take your slides down so we can see you a little better, that would be
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question. Jocelyn, given how challenging it is for legislators to change their own pay, which is true for all 50 legislatures, how many of them have, clearly not New Hampshire, how many of them have a trigger that automatically updates and keeps it trued up with average, you know, state salaries, or, you know, whatever they would use as a standard for keeping it.
Absolutely. I apologize. I'm a little under the weather. Let me look something up real quick, because I there are numbers. I just don't have them off the top of my head.
I'm sorry, Jocelyn, that you're not feeling well. Thank you for being with us
Of
despite
course.
that. I'm glad you could zoom in.
I'm happy
We're delighted you're not here. We're glad. Where are you? You're in Colorado? No.
Yes.
Yes, I'm in Colorado. Sorry, I apologize.
No,
That's okay.
no worries. You need to take a break. Go ahead and we can.
All right, I'm having a moment to pull up the specific numbers, but
You can get back to us on it. It would be great to know.
Yeah.
'Cause that was-
what I can say is there's 3 different ways that NCSL typologizes the way that states set compensation, and that's directly through the law, statute, direct democracy voting, things like that. Included in that would be obviously legislators setting their own pay via statute, or amending the Constitution. Some states use compensation commissions, and this has actually been a solution used by some states to address what you were talking about, the difficulty of legislators setting their own pay. And so the compensation commission, an external body, reviews and sets the pay or sets the pay or offers recommendations for the pay for legislators. And the autonomy of that really depends. Some states require that the legislature votes on whatever that salary recommendation is. Some states kind of leave it optional, like a state has 45 days to, or the legislature has 45 days to vote on the salary. And if they don't vote on it, it becomes the salary. Other states, commission gets to set it and the legislature has no say in it whatsoever. The third way is done usually via index. So it's like tying salary to like median income in the state, or maybe to a salary of another state employee that has been deemed comparable to that of like a state legislator as well. So those are all different ways that pay is set.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah, no,
thank you.
yeah.
Senator White?
Thank you, Chair Hardy. Do you have a sense, Jocelyn, since you have a lay of the land nationally, do you find that the states that have a higher pay or more benefits tend to attract younger or more diverse workforce?
Right.
Does that bear out?
NCSL actually does not currently have information available on that. So we don't have information that can directly tell us the relationship between legislator compensation and who is serving in state legislators here at NCSL. I will say we just wrapped up in 2022. We did a whole survey of legislators in terms of their time spent in legislative work and their demographics. And we're excited to dig into those results, which might give a little bit more insight to the question you're asking.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Yeah,
because
that
we-
would be great because
Yeah, I'd love that.
I think that's been a concern here, that the pay and benefits are a barrier for a lot of legislators based on a number of demographic factors. So, yeah, Senator Peterson, did you have a question? Okay. Senator Clarkson?
Yeah, so when do you expect to have that, Jocelyn?
We're just digging into it now. We're hopeful to have some sort of information released sometime this spring.
Okay.
If you'd get it to us as soon as possible, we'd appreciate it.
I'm sure you'll make a splash when you have it, report, but that would be helpful if we do this off session
Right.
study committee to have that data. Are there other questions at the moment, Senator Watson?
So it's not necessarily for Jocelyn, it's just more general.
Okay, well, then why don't we hold that thought and then, well, Jocelyn, do you have any other things you want to share with us?
That's what I have right now, and I'm happy to look into the nuances of legislator leave laws for you guys, and give that information back to you.
Okay, and then another of your colleagues had more information potentially about staffing.
Yes, yeah.
Do
Yeah, I will circle back and make sure I get you connected with that. But that colleague is actually watching right now, so I'm sure she's making a note that.
Yeah, she emailed me, so I can get back to her as well. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And another question I have is, do you have suggestions for anybody else nationally that you think we might benefit from hearing from about these issues?
Again, I apologize. Like I said, it's a lot today. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'm happy to think about it. If I think of something, I'm happy to share it with you.
Okay, that would be great. If there are other resources that we should consider, let us know. Thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you feel better.
Thank you.
I'm in there. Have a good weekend.
All right. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, Senator Watson, did you want to?
Yeah, so do we expect a fiscal note about this?
So any bill that has the fiscal effect has to have a fiscal note when it leaves committee. So we will, once we sort of more hone in on what we're doing, we'll ask JFO to look at it and give us a fiscal note.
Okay.
There's not one yet because we just don't know exactly what we're doing, what if this will be the final amount. And so things need to be more solidified. But they're aware of the bill, and I've already discussed it a little bit with Catherine Benham. So yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Senator Vihos, do you have a comment? Okay.
Good start. I'm sorry I missed so much.
No, that's fine. Yeah, we will get back to this. So I have BTHR, the commissioner, potentially the vision support team, Abby, DHR, that's the commissioner from DHR. That's Beth. Employer representatives, and then legislators, former legislators who had to leave because they couldn't continue to serve, or if there are other, if you think of other people, let me know.
This is not a new issue. I just want to say, my first session here, we had a nurse in Brattleboro who I remember very vividly, and he could not, it became impossible for him to continue.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is not a new issue. This is an
Right, and I think
old issue.
Senator Vihosky's point about, it's an issue for people who never even make it here because they're not gonna run because they can't afford to. And I've certainly had many experiences from my past work of trying to recruit people to run for office. There are so many people who are just like, I can't do that. I can't afford to do that. And so it's really leaving out a lot of people. So we will come back to this bill for sure. Thank you so much, Jen, for your time today.